Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Meeplis and this is Literally Graphic, and today we are taking a look at the Anti-Fascist comic book, 100 Years of Fascism and Anti-Fascism Movements by Gord Hill. Hill is also the author of the 500 Years of Resistance comic book that I reviewed at the end of May. Link in the cards. Warnings for violence and one image of bare breasts. Also, some representation of hate symbols. As with his last volume, this is a tough subject, but not done in a way that exploits or even shows that much, except in quick snapshots. The Anti-Fascist comic book was published on October 30th, 2018 by Arsenal Pulp Press. It covers the history of movements against fascism from Italy to Charlottesville in 128 pages. Much like 500 Years, this is a thick and dense history. I certainly knew the general timeline behind some of these periods and actions, but this starts connecting the international phenomena of fascism. And as far as the stories I was not aware of, Gord Hill certainly has a point of view from which he presents these histories, but so far his work has proven itself pretty trustworthy, so I at least will be sticking with it for now. I would even say that his position as a member of the Kwakwaka'wakw Nation led him to highlight some of the different colonialist efforts of fascists that I had previously not been aware of. The chapters of this short volume are as follows. What is fascism? What is anti-fascism? The fasci of Rome, Italy, Germany, Anti-Fascist resistance in Germany, pre-1933. Concentration camps, anti-Semitism in Europe, anti-fascist resistance inside Germany, the partisans, the Spanish Civil War, British black shirts and the Battle of Cable Street, anarchy in the UK, beating the fascists with Britain's anti-fascist action, anti-fascism in the New Germany, Resistencia Continua, Italy's ongoing anti-fascist struggle, anti-fascism in Greece, anti-fascism in Russia, action anti-fascisti in France, Ukraine's NATO coup, the German Islamic Alliance, in anti-fascism in Syria. Sweden's anti-fascistic action, the Ku Klux Klan, fascists in the USA, anti-racist action, the Ku Klux Klan of Canada, fascist movements in Canada, ARA Toronto, and the rise and fall of the alt-right. Unlike previous volumes, this book is in color, and while I generally prefer the simplicity and contrast of black and white, the coloring is top-notch and renders the page even more striking. I wouldn't have minded a diagram of some of the symbols these groups used, but we do get many integrated into the overall coverage, so that's good enough, I guess. While I still don't necessarily critique the 500 Years of Resistance for not highlighting gender more, I did appreciate the way the gender binary was at least more equally represented in anti-fascist work, especially after my initial thoughts video on Y: The Last Man. I needed to have more representation of people who ID as women and as warriors. Much like the women who participated in the anti-fascist movement, it would have been very nice to have queer contributions obviously labeled. That said, we are not being completely ignored, and Hill does present all the different groups that were persecuted by fascists, particularly in Germany, so we are not completely erased. Race is obviously still pretty central to this book, as it is a point that has been used in a lot of fascist oppression. Anti-fascist resistance is a team sport that brings all races of people together across our socially constructed differences. Closely related in many fascist minds, but different. One of the most interesting intersections highlighted by Hill in this book was the temporary alliances between fascist Germans and fascist Muslims. A very select group. Hill does contrast this with how fascism is anti-Muslim now, which I think is very important to note, even if some people were otherwise brought together by their anti-Semitism. And while class, especially as far as any given individual is concerned, is not a focus of this book, class does come up in general in relation to who was generally participating in each fascist, anti-fascist, and hopelessly useless party in play during each time period covered. Disability versus ability was not highlighted in this book, which is a real oversight. Unless I'm very much mistaken, Hill didn't even highlight the way disabled people would have been targeted in fascist Germany. It would also have been good to highlight more accessible ways in which people resist fascism and or visually represent obviously disabled people in any of the crowds, especially in the end, where we are in the present day. I wish this book already had more graphic novels that related to it as well. I think it's successful at telling the overall history of anti-fascist resistance, but there's a lot of room yet to tell these stories in different ways. I will be rating this book 4 out of 5 stars. Bye y'all, keep reading and resist white supremacy. And as always, Literally Graphic is recorded on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and Anishinaabe people, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat Nation. I live here because of British colonization, indigenous genocide, and more geographically specific, Treaty 13, also known as the Toronto Purchase, which was finalized in 1805 between representatives of the Crown and certain Mississauga peoples. This treaty was a lie and has since been broken many times over. Saying so reflects only my own small steps towards knowing the truth and does nothing for reconciliation.